title is The Key Obstacles Arab Students Face When Learning English. And we've got two guests with us lined up for the session. Just to give you a brief overview of the session, this session is going to cover some of the common challenges native Arab speakers face when learning English language. We will be discussing some solutions to it, and it's more so going to be a discussion between ELT experts. So I have with me Christopher Graham and Dr. Alia Michelle. And you will also have the opportunity to ask questions at the end of the session. So I'm happy to be here. And I just want to say that my slide has stuck. Okay, there you go. Works again. I have with me my colleague Fatma, who's a marketing executive, and I'm Sarish. I'm a marketing manager at McGraw Hill, and we are in the background to help you and support you if you face any technical difficulties, or if you're having problems with logging in. Let us know in the chat box or the Q&A box, and we're happy to help you. The recent webinars, some people complained that they cannot see the screen or they cannot hear. Just make sure you log out of Zoom and log back in. It should work. But thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being here. I would like to hand over now to Chris, who'll just introduce himself, and we'll carry on from there then. Thank you so much for joining.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So should we take away the slides and then we'll just go to speaker screen? I think that's probably the best thing to do. Okay, so greetings and welcome everybody. Welcome from me. I'm sitting here in London in the United Kingdom, where our hot summer has come to a very abrupt end, a wet and abrupt end. And I'm very happy indeed that it's raining. It's not often you hear somebody who lives in the United Kingdom saying that, but I'm very happy that the wet weather has come. It feels much more like I'm at home again. Just a few introductions. Maybe I'll ask Dr. Alia, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your interests and your projects, and then I'll do the same about me.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I'm Dr. Alia Mitchell. I am currently based in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia at Prince Sultan University. I'm the Vice Dean of the College of Humanities and Sciences, as well as the Director of the Teaching and Learning Center. I'm also a Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy. I have been in the Middle East, particularly in the Gulf, over 20 years, predominantly in Riyadh. And education is something I'm passionate about. I'm also, Arabic is my second language, not my first language. English is my first language. And I hope that our discussion today will be lively and engaging for everyone who has joined us in this session today. Chris?
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Alia. Well, I'll introduce myself. I'm Christopher Graham. As I said, I'm based in the United Kingdom. It's always fascinated people at McGraw Hill how long I've been working in English language teaching for. I think I've been working in this line of work since 1981, which seems a very long time ago, and people look at me as a piece of living history. But let's just say I've got quite a lot of experience as a teacher educator. Most of my work at the moment is writing. I'm writing books for teachers. I've just published a book about introducing looking at the interaction between the climate crisis and English language teaching, and ways of integrating climate topics into teaching. And my work on climate change, particularly for the British Council, is taking a lot of my time at the moment. My particular interests are late teenager, young adult, that kind of age range from about 16 to 25, when I think for many learners are the most formative years, perhaps. So it's a really exciting time to be involved with learners of that age, whether it's in high school or whether it's in university. And I'm particularly interested in the transition from high school, senior school to university, and the challenges that it gives the learners and it gives us. In terms of the Middle East, I was in Oman for 9 years working for the Ministry of Education on and off. And I've also worked extensively in North Africa, in Algeria, Tunisia and Morocco on various projects, particularly for the British Council. So that's me. Maybe I'll say a little bit about today. Probably most of sessions that you go to, webinar sessions you go to, there's somebody talking, I was going to say to you, maybe I should say at you, with a series of PowerPoints behind them that change and that kind of more formal or structured presentation. We decided we'd do something rather different today. There are no slides. I promise you, no slides. And the idea is that it's a conversation, and it's not scripted. We may run out of things to say. I don't think so, but it's not a scripted conversation. The idea is that you will listen, but more importantly, that you will participate. I think that's really important. And we have the chat box. If you want to put something in the chat, I'll try and keep an eye on it. And I'm sure Cherish and her team will also keep an eye on the chat to make sure we involve as many of you as possible. Obviously, you cannot speak because it's a webinar platform, but I think having 111 English teachers all speaking at the same time would be a little bit boisterous anyway. But do please put any questions or comments or points that you want to make in the chat box, and we'll try and share them with other people and try and discuss them. Another thing I should say is while we've said it's around the obstacles that speakers of Arabic have when developing their English, we're not wanting to be stereotypical anyway. We all know that a given class of 25 learners, you have 25 different people, each with their own challenges, their own characters, their own abilities, that we have to manage. And simply the idea of grouping together Arabic first language learners is really, I suppose, a convenient framework for discussion, no more than that. And obviously, there are huge differences, and the way that Arabic interferes in English, the way that different learners will manage that will vary considerably, of course. And finally, before we start the conversation, about a little bit about you. I mean, the problem with these sessions is we never know who's going to come, and people register, but they don't always come. So hopefully there will be something for people who've been perhaps teaching English in the Arab world for 20 years, who knows? Equally, hopefully there will be something for people who've just arrived, particularly people who've come from outside of the Arab world to come and live and work in those communities, and for whom it's all a little bit puzzling perhaps at the beginning. So something for everybody. Hopefully those who either have Arabic as their first language, and equally those who are learning Arabic, or those who have no Arabic. Hopefully there will be something for all those people as well. The webinar someone should put a message up, the webinar will finish in an hour at 12 o'clock my time, which I think is 3 o'clock in the Gulf. So you don't have to worry too long. Okay, so let's begin talking, shall we? So I think I don't know what you think, Ali, but people, I've often spoken to teachers in the Middle East, and the word that begins with M, that is motivation,
Right.
comes up in conversations, doesn't it, quite regularly?
Of course.
What's your sense? What would you say about the varying levels of motivation that we appear to have amongst learners in the Middle East?
That's a good question, and first of all, I think it's important to point out that learning is a lifelong endeavor. And when we think about it, in order to instill and sustain this love for learning, which, by the way, I'm very passionate about learning, motivation is a must. Now, how can we help our students achieve that motivation? For me, it starts with myself as an educator. I have to be motivated. So when I go into the classroom, my level of motivation will impact my students, my learners. So I think this is one of the most important things, is my own personal level of motivation. And we know, I believe most of us are educators, that motivation is an important part of what happens inside the classroom. Both teachers and students need the motivation. We know about intrinsic, extrinsic motivation, intrinsic being the internal to a person, my own personal reasons for wanting this, and then extrinsic could be something like grades, rewards, something external to myself. The key to successful learning is just being able to motivate them to take ownership. And this is a key word right here, ownership of their learning. And for the teachers, I think it's important that we also recognize that students need to be at the heart of what happens inside the classroom. And once we give them that and we show them that respect, I believe that their motivation does increase. If you look at, there's lots of theories out there. There's the self-determination theory. It does promote autonomy or ownership of learning, competence, or relatedness. And in my own opinion, humble opinion, if you're not familiar with motivational theories about inside education or the classroom or personal motivation in the first place, is I do recommend you read Dornier. May he rest in peace. His work is a great place to start if you would like to learn more about motivation.
It's interesting where you made that split between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. As you said, the extrinsic maybe examination grades, or the institution itself provides extrinsic motivation through its structures and its organizations.
Correct.
For a school leaver, somebody coming out of school at age 17, 18, whatever, 19, that intrinsic motivation can be quite a challenge, can't it? How can we really make that 17, 18-year-old boy wants, or girl, I'm not suggesting necessarily that men are less motivated than women. That's another discussion to have, perhaps. So Freudian slip there, maybe. But how can we increase that intrinsic motivation of that student to really want to be in that room learning English with that teacher?
Okay, from my own personal experience and dealing with students, whether here in the Middle East or even in the US, when I was teaching in the US, it's about myself and how I come into the classroom, and then how I present the material. I need to actually tap into their own interests. I need to relate the topic, the information, whatever it is I am covering. If like this morning in class, I'm teaching Introduction to Applied Linguistics, and we were covering grammar, the impact of grammar in language use. And so we were going through sentences, and I was getting them to analyze the language. So this is how can I motivate them at 8 o'clock in the morning to be analyzing sentences about any kind of error, whether it's grammar, meaning, or is it standard English or not standard English. It's not about right and wrong, because right now what we're looking at is if it's if there is something in the form that doesn't make sense. So it's just about connecting it to them, getting them to relate it. So what I do is we speak about it. The sentences are in English. Then I also get them to think about, what does it mean in Arabic? So can you give me some examples in the Arabic language? Now, I have students who are studying applied linguistics, but if I was teaching in the language classroom, I have to bring it back to their personal experiences, their background, what they know. As soon as you're able to get them to connect to whatever it is that you may be covering, whether it's writing, speaking, listening, grammar, vocabulary, if we can get our students connected to it, show them respect, it will help boost their intrinsic motivation, because they want to do well.
That's really interesting, because I mean, if you look at, I'm sure you have some of the work of the earlier behavioral psychologists who talk about having an effective or emotional relationship with the language, moving away from your students, but towards low level A1, A2 learners. I really who appear not to be participating. People will participate. People will interact around topics that mean something to them. I really think that's so important, isn't it? Whether it's and I think it's fundamentally important, and that's something that course books try to address. The extent to which they address it varies, I think, but that's when the teacher's the bridge. That's when the teacher might say, we've got this in the coursework. Now, what about in this context? The context, your context, your town, your city, your family, whatever. And then people will engage. It's just, I suppose the problem with course books is that they're written for a global audience, for a student that doesn't exist.
Exactly. And
we're the bridge, aren't we, really, somehow, bringing that. It's personalization. And another thing about motivation, I mean, and not everyone likes this idea, but I think sometimes showing that as a teacher you are you're human. It's a bit strange, suggesting teachers are not human, though I fully think that some students don't think we are human. But if you have yourself learnt English, I mean, we're both native speakers, we haven't been through that process, but many colleagues here today will have been through that process. Sometimes saying to a student who's struggling, yeah, I remember this, but it's okay. Don't worry. You'll get there. It's horrible. I know it's difficult. You'll get there. That means so much to a student. I mean, we can't do that.
Of course. Not for learning English, but I can for learning Arabic. So I give them plenty. Yeah, the other way around. I speak to them about my process of learning Arabic, and my بتكلم بالعربي عادي. But to read and write in Arabic, it's a little bit more complex for me, to be honest.
But that they immediately think, oh, well, my teacher's doing okay, and they just feel reassured, and that because it is a struggle, and
exactly.
And you obviously have a great empathy with their struggle because you've done it the other way around.
Exactly.
And I think and I think students do appreciate that. They hear, oh, well, my teacher's she's struggling a bit, and I'm not saying you're struggling, but you know what I mean. And but that's okay. Where she actually understands what's going on. Thinking about the two languages, I mean, obviously with the A1 level students, or the people talk a lot about A0 students now. I mean, that's a new level that seems to be
the true
emerging.
Beginner,
the true beginner. How do we deal with the alphabet issue? Because it is an issue for people coming out of high school sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, yes. It is.
What do we do?
Well, to be honest, the alphabetical differences, it is significant between English and Arabic. I can remember, see, this is where I go to. I remember when I was trying to learn Arabic and how complex
there we are.
It was.
That's a good example.
There we are. Okay. All right. So, however, I think with the current learners, if we look at the current population, the technology, they've grown up. If we look at our students now coming out of high school and going into university, they've grown up with smartphones and tablets, computers. So the alphabet differences might be, I can't guarantee it, it's not going to be the case for everybody. They might be less significant depending on your student population. But if we really think about what are the major differences, English uses the Latin alphabet. It's written from left to right. Arabic uses the Arabic script, and it's written right to left. So, and the interesting thing about Arabic, it doesn't differentiate between upper and lowercase letters. It doesn't adhere to punctuation rules as much as English does. There are no capital letters in Arabic, so you don't need to know that. There's no writing or printing, if you will, that I had to learn when I was in school in Arabic. It's, it's the same. However, in Arabic, the shape of the letter changes depending on if it's at the beginning, middle, or end. And memorizing that was a chore, actually, when I was first learning Arabic. But English letters stay the same, only if you want to make it capital or lowercase. That's it. It doesn't change its shape or form. And then you think of spelling. If we're talking about the alphabet, okay, so they're going to be using the letters, and then they have to be thinking about spelling. In English, how enough? Okay, let's just take the word enough. If you spell
it's
it,
absurd,
I mean,
isn't it?
it's absolutely absurd. Okay, and you have to keep in mind that Arabic is a phonetic language, so the words are spelled the way they sound. In English, that's not always the case, and there are lots of examples. And it's to, in Arabic, if you know the letters and the sounds of the letters, then you know how to pronounce the words. English, on the other hand, not always the case, because it's not a phonetic language. We've kept the spelling system back from Chaucer and Shakespeare's time period for the most part. So it's quite interesting how the language, the pronunciation in English has changed over the years, and it can cause problems. Some of the things that I have done in the past for my students who have serious issues with spelling is dictation. I know it's not really a favorite thing, or might not be, but sometimes it's just a way to help them overcome their spelling errors. For Arabic speakers, I think learning English is not just like learning new words, but it's also learning to read and write all over again. And vice versa. For me, it was learning to read and write all over again in Arabic. So it's that whenever you're learning a new language, and especially if the alphabet has a different set of letters, it's like you're learning to do it all over again, because you have to start from the alphabet, learn the alphabet, so on and so forth. So we have to keep that in mind, especially when we have those A0 or true beginners inside the classroom, and find ways to help the learners who are just starting on their journey of learning English in this case. So you have to spend time on letter formation, handwriting, and possibly even reading, just so that they can get familiar with the alphabet.
Yeah, I agree totally, and I there's a lot to unpick in what you said there. But so, I mean, again, we had the your empathy, because you for you it felt like going back to school again, as starting from
Yes,
scratch.
exactly.
And of course, it feels the same for them. And I think for teachers who haven't worked in the Arab world before, or in other countries where they have the same issues with scripts, it's a bit of a shock. I remember soon when I first started working in the Arab world, I would look at an apparently fluent speaker of English, but I'd look at his written work and this can't be the same individual. It's such a shock, isn't it? But of course, you become used to that. A kind of springboard question, which I think what someone's mentioned in the Q&A there is about the first language. I mean, what's your view on using Arabic in class? Do you have a view? Your personal view, institutional view? I know it's what's the expression? A hot potato.
Okay, institutional view or personal view?
I've left that to you.
Okay,
I know it's a hot potato. Yeah.
It's really a hot potato. But, for me, if I'm teaching true beginners, if it's A0, because here at my own institution, we have an intensive English program. And a lot of the times the students are coming in and they are true beginners or beginners level. So you need to have somebody in the classroom that can switch back and forth between English and Arabic in order to help facilitate the lesson. I think about myself when I was learning Arabic, and also been trying to learn Greek as well. So so when you're first starting out, you need someone to help you with that, the pronunciation, the difference, so that you can understand, and we also have to remember, teaching adults is not always the same as teaching children. So we have to keep that in mind as well. So it's not always clear cut. I'm not against using it, especially when it's needed to help the learner understand what is expected of them or needed, or the vocabulary. Maybe you could use pictures. Depending if it's just vocabulary that you're focusing on, you could use pictures to help them understand what does this word mean. There are a lot of ways that you can go about it, but throwing in a little bit of translation every now and then might be okay, depending on the situation.
I mean, I absolutely agree. I'm probably more radical on that, but then again, I don't work for an institution, and so I'm in that sense. But I believe many teachers don't use enough of the first language. I think it's a tremendous. At some levels, it's a psychological prop or support. I mean, I think those of us who haven't learned a new language for years tend to forget actually how difficult and how confusing that world of an A0/A1 student is. So I think it's a psychological prop, even if it's just a whisper or a quick note to one or two students who are struggling. But students are doing it anyway. Yes, whatever you do, whatever, knowing no Arabic, they're doing it either in their minds or whispering, or we all know that goes on. So I tend to say, let's use it. But the first thing to use Arabic for will be to delineate when we can and can't use it, in a sense, saying, look, if these are the things we might use Arabic for, in grammar we might use it for a comparison. So look, I know why you're getting this wrong, because it's not like that. It's like this. Back to English, and I think that you've killed the problem stone dead in 2 minutes. It might take 25 minutes or never.
Exactly.
To do it in English,
Yeah.
But it has to be delineated, doesn't it? So they don't, primary. If you teach primary and a primary child asks in Arabic if they can go to the bathroom, you say, no, you ask me in English, because come on,
Yeah, exactly.
that's not an acceptable use. But I don't understand this word. Fine, that's an acceptable use. So I think delineation is important, and many of you may have been reading about or heard about the whole movement towards translanguaging. It's a very, very interesting trend in ELT, and it has the potential to absolutely change the way that we teach. It'll be a while before institutions and ministries become accepting of it, I think, but it's going to be really, really interesting.
So if you look in the day-to-day society, translanguaging is happening all over.
Absolutely. I mean, and the Gulf probably more than anywhere, actually, because it's such a mix of cultures and languages.
Yes.
Actually, my favorite place for translanguaging is probably Lebanon, actually. I mean, I have Lebanese friends who start a sentence in Arabic, and after 5 or 6 words, they're speaking French, and they finish it in English. And that's perfectly not, they just jump. And I've tried to figure out whether they change according to what they're talking about, or why did you say that in English? Or we just do. Well, it's not the case in the Gulf. Thinking about the sound system, I mean, there are challenges there with the sound system, the contrast between English and Arabic. How important is it all? How much time do you think we worry about teaching, developing the sound system and pronunciation? How big a thing is it, do you think?
How big of a thing is it? Well, it's important to a certain extent. If they get it 100% accurate, I don't know if that needs to be the case. As long as, if you come back to the the intent of the communication, if the person is being understood, isn't that okay? I mean, from a linguistic perspective, they're able to successfully communicate in the other language. But if we look at the sounds themselves, if I go a little bit beyond that, and we look at the sounds, when you compare between somebody who's speaking Arabic, you can realize how different the sounds are to those who use English. English has, I think, at least 3 times as many vowel sounds as Arabic. I mean, in Arabic, you have the fatha, dhamma, kasra, and then it goes with the consonants. But in English, we throw vowels in, we have the schwa, we have diphthongs, and we just make up vowels as we go along, So it becomes a little bit more complex, I think, for a native speaker of Arabic to be able to distinguish between those vowel sounds, because they don't have them in their language. And if they, aren't confident in their language use, maybe those sounds might not come out exactly as a native speaker would speak. But do they have to? This is something we need to ask ourselves. Do they really have to? So if I can give an example, we know, based on research, that the first language, and possibly our own personal experiences, mine in particular, first language can easily be transferred to the second language. So if we take pa and ba, right, this sound, so ba is in both languages, so b is in both languages, but pa, the p, is not in Arabic. So when I used to teach speaking and pronunciation, one of the ways I would help my students to be able to distinguish between those two sounds is that you just put a tissue in front of your mouth. When you pronounce ba, the tissue doesn't move. When you pronounce pa, the tissue moves. So you can see the sound coming out, and so that then they can know, are they pronouncing it right or not? I mean, this is one of the easiest ways, I think, for students to see the difference between these two sounds. And of course, you can do something similar for, you know, f and v as well. Same thing. So it can help the learners recognize those differences and then try to improve their pronunciation of those sounds. And for me, I can also relate it back to the opposite way, from English into Arabic, because the Arabic has sounds that we don't have, and they have the glottal sounds, you know, the ha, which I still have difficulty doing, and then the kha and the gha. So it helps the students to be able to see the differences between the two languages. And if you're able to relate it to them so that they can see the sound differences and the sound patterns, I think it makes it easier for them to understand. And if we go one step further, when we're talking about sounds, okay, so we're talking about vowels, but what about the consonants? You know, in Arabic, remember I said previously, it's a phonetic language. So you have the consonant and the vowel sound there, and they don't really have consonant clusters so much in Arabic like we do in English. And if you take my last name, Mitchell, you can see it written there on the screen. You know, this is not something found in Arabic, because I have a consonant cluster T, C, H, and it's that ch, Mitchell, that ch sound in the middle of my last my family name. So Arabic learners might try to insert a vowel sound into that long consonant cluster. Am I going too much into sound? Because I think sounds are so important.
No, I think this is interesting. I think it's interesting. As to whether it's important, no, go on, Connie, go on.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, I mean, I absolutely agree. And the pub is the one that everybody knows, and Bebsi and pizza and all this stuff that we kind of we laugh about with students, and they still can't get it right. It is to the extent to which, given that time is not our friend in most English language contexts, whether we give too much priority to individual sounds, I don't know. If somebody goes into a restaurant and asks for pizza, they'll know what he wants because he's in a restaurant. The context does the work. He's not buying a railway ticket, and they know that they don't sell railway tickets. They sell pizzas or pizzas. So whether we worry too much about individual sounds, but I mean, but I'm also very interested in things like, for example, tonic stress, which is so powerful in English, the way that we stress a syllable, or sometimes a word syllable, where we automatically draw attention to what we think is the most important thing in the sentence or the phrase. I think learning that is really important because it does give you a bonus. It also helps comprehension and makes it more comprehensible.
Yeah, of course, because Arabic is a stress time language. So its stress patterns are very predictable. However, English it's as you said, it's the syllable time language, which means the stress patterns change according to the syllable. And so Arabic learners might struggle with, pronouncing words or sentence stress correctly. Yeah.
And that I think is really important because it does help comprehension, because if they just hear a sea of sounds coming towards them, but they can pick out where the tonic stress, it's the stress on that word, that's probably the word that actually really will help me understand what they want. So kind of teaching them those kind of map reading devices, I think, is really important. But I mean, as you say, that individual sounds are absolutely fascinating, I think, and some will definitely impede comprehension, others won't, I suppose. We have to be sort of fairly selective. We've got a couple of people who are coming to the conversation. Interesting question here. What is your approach to learning through failure? In Arab cultures, making mistakes equals losing one's face. People don't want to admit they've made mistakes.
First of all, yeah.
Interesting. I don't know the culture well enough to whether you agree with that general statement about errors and
yeah. In this culture, yeah, typically. But for me, the first thing I tell my students is mistakes are how we learn. So it's okay to make a mistake. So you have to foster this inside the classroom from the very beginning, is that mistakes are okay. It's how we learn. You can't losing one's face. Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, I know the struggle because when I was first trying to speak in Arabic, when I first moved to Saudi Arabia a few years ago, several years ago, I was shy. I was very shy to start speaking in Arabic because here I am surrounded by all these native speakers of Arabic. What if I make a mistake? So I understand my students, you know, their self-esteem issues. So being able to account for that inside the classroom, sharing your own personal story, your own personal journey with learning another language will help them overcome that embarrassment, because they should not be embarrassed. That's the first thing you have to really convince your students. And asking questions is so important inside the classroom. I tell them that I expect to learn from them as much as they expect to learn from me, because this is a two-way street. You know, I wanted to be there. I'm there to facilitate their learning. Peer pressure, demotivation, and it's something that we as educators have to find ways that are going to help our students understand that it should not be embarrassing. You shouldn't be laughing at someone who is struggling with reading. Thank you, Karen. Yes, definitely. That's great to hear that she had a student share that she learned in her course that it was okay to make mistakes. This is a major obstacle. I think across cultures. It's not just here in the Arab
by no means just
culture.
in the Arab world. No.
Yeah. It goes across all cultures, and it's just about trying to find what's going to work best for the students inside your classroom at this point in time. And you have to create, it goes back to the environment inside your classroom. What kind of environment? How do you arrange your desks? How do you come into the classroom and greet your students? So it's about finding that happy place where the students can feel comfortable that even if they make a mistake, they know it's okay. So it's about creating that comfortable environment in the classroom. I think this is the best thing you can do to help the students overcome that peer pressure or that feeling of embarrassment if they make a mistake. It's okay. It's all right. That's how we learn.
Yeah.
We all do it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my first teaching jobs in an institution in Italy, and Italians have a strong sense of face. They don't want la brutta figura. They call it the ugly face, the bad face, and the embarrassment. So, believe it or not, given the kind of stereotype of Italians who would like to talk a lot, they're actually, their first days in English are very quiet because, as you say, they're embarrassed or nervous. We had the idea of something we called a zero lesson, when the first part of the first lesson on each course would be given in Italian, and it was saying, look, basically, when that door is closed, this is our little world. The kind of, what do you call it in US Vegas rules, we call Chatham House rules. You know, what happens in here stays in here. And we talked about respect, and we talk about it's fine to laugh. You can laugh with someone who's struggling as opposed to laughing at someone who's struggling. And also about, I expect you to ask me questions. I'm not going to lecture. I'm not going to just throw lots and lots of verb tense, because you won't learn anything at all. It's a waste of time. Just ask me things. If you don't know, if you're confused, put your hand up, say, I don't understand. It's fine to say I don't understand. And it was a real struggle for them, because from the States were there, the high school experience was a totally different thing, where they were talked at, and showing you didn't understand was a sign of weakness or sign of failure. And so I think we can actually address these things absolutely head on with learners and say, but possibly doing that in Arabic just for ease of communication, saying it's fine, this is our little world in here for however many hours we're in the room together. And I think they start, as you say, they start to relax. And I think something else I saw in the chat box, a safe environment, someone says that each environment is unique. Absolutely. I agree completely with all these things. And I think we, as teachers, as the older we get as teachers, the more experience, we're better at becoming empathetic, I think, better at picking up clues, aren't we, somehow, and knowing when to dive in and when not to. Perhaps we should think about methodology, because I think one of the big shocks in the kind of high school to university transfer, that which is probably into a prep-year program or some kind of bridge program, is that the teachers are not like my school teachers. They're asking me to talk, and working groups and all this. Oh, I don't like that.
Yeah.
What do we do to ease that transition, do you think? I think it is a valid problem, isn't it?
Definitely. It's a good question to raise. And I would come back with, I think we have to start, first of all, what is the purpose of the preparatory year programs? That first year into to university, maybe some institutions have them, maybe some do not. But in my own institution, and I think other institutions as well, it's viewed as a bridge between high school and university life. The program is meant to prepare the students to study at university. It gets them acquainted with life on campus, life of knowing how to study. They take English, they take personal development skills where they learn how to take effective notes, how to prepare for writing papers, so on and so forth. Just little tips and tricks, for their own personal development, time management, etc., so that they can be prepared for what it is to be a young adult who is getting ready to study at university. It should be a place, in an environment that is accepting of, who they are when they come to university. And you're basically there to guide and facilitate them on their journey through the university, whether it's, if they stop at their bachelor's, if they continue, this is something that they will take with them because they're getting the skills that they need to be successful at learning. That's what I see. This is how I see the methodology that we should be using in any of these like foundation level courses for students coming straight from high school. There needs to be this like bridge and understanding, and universities and schools need to be working together. It's not like they're in their own world and we're in our own world and we don't work together and then each complains about one another. No.
Blame the other one.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a positive learning environment. We're trying to teach our students to overcome these kinds of obstacles. We ourselves as educators have to overcome these obstacles. Okay, lots of people complain. They're saying the students coming from K through 12, they don't know this, and this. Okay, then why? Okay, so what are you doing? You're pointing out a problem. Then what's the solution? How can we do that? We connect together. We connect high schools and universities. We go back and we do some training. We talk about the practical applications of what happens inside the classroom and how that's going to impact the students. And so by the time they come to university, they have the skills that you think they should have. I mean, educators, this is the way I see it. If I'm going to complain about it, then I'm going to have to come up with
something about it. Yeah, absolutely.
Do something about it.
And I absolutely love the idea of the university. We're working backwards by going to the high school and possibly doing some teacher development work, or some of the university teaching staff going into the high school and saying, we'll teach a few lessons so they'll get used to the feel of it. Because it can be a dreadful shock, because they've, as you pointed out, there's a shock at different levels. There's the shock of the classroom, having to work perhaps in pairs or groups, or being asked to solve a problem or something, and there's that level. But there's also the huge psychological level, possibly being away from home. I know that's less common in the Arab world, but it is still, for some people, it is an issue that they've gone off from home. But also, it's not so structured. You quite rightly are expected to think for yourself, and I remember my own transition from school to university. I mean, at my university, one of my lecturers, I think he was probably just lazy, actually thinking again. But I remember we met him the first workshop, first seminar. He gave us a reading list and said, "I'll see you in 5 weeks." And that was it. That was his input. And I didn't really know what to do. He meant read the books and we'll talk about them, which we did. But I thought, well, someone's ever done this to me before. So I think, it's again, it's empathy, I think, isn't it? There's one or two other interesting things coming up. There was something I spotted. The chat box is very active, isn't it? And
yes, it is.
I'm getting lost. There was something I like to say. We've got about the bridge, the
There's a
foundation courses.
question. Yeah.
That's just something I saw. Academic in English. Sorry. Where was it? Someone asked about team writing. This is very interesting, and it's got springs off from the methodology thing. I'm a very firm believer that learning takes place in small groups of students collaborating, rather than the teacher providing. And I love that moment when you have maybe 4 students working together, looking at some sample sentences and picking out a pattern. The same as ing. So when you have one of those, you have one of those. Because I think that's when you actually witness learning happening. How easy is it to get people who've come from from a local high school into that kind of collaborative mind frame, do you think?
It's not complicated. I think they like working in groups.
Okay, that's good.
Mostly. No, I'm not going to say 100% because I do have some students. I do have some students who prefer to work by themselves and they don't want to be in groups. But the thing is that when you create your groups, this is my advice, make certain you know your students well so that each student participates and it's not just one student doing all of the work.
That's the risk, isn't it? I think we have to be strategic in forming the groups based upon character. Not so much language level, but upon character, because there's always one guy, I know, I'll do it. And the others just, oh, he's doing it. And that's the problem, I think. But I do really believe, I mean, and I think it's a challenge for teachers, particularly new teachers sometimes, to make that jump from a very teacher-centered environment towards a more learner-centered environment, because I think, I don't know what you think, but teachers often feel there's a risk that they've lost control. Because I'm not talking, I'm not driving the bus anymore.
It depends on the teacher's personal preferences and pedagogy and their philosophy for education. For me, in a language classroom, I think when I go and I observe or I walk past a language classroom here, even here at my own institution, it's like I'm happy when I see them in groups and they're actually working and they're speaking. So they're communicating with one another in English, or at least trying their best to do so, depending on the level of the class that they happen to be in. So it's language isn't like a one-person thing. Why do we learn language? We learn language to be able to communicate. It is one of the social aspects. As human beings, we want to get to know others. We want to be able to communicate with others. So this is I think one of the key principles behind having them work in groups. When they finish their degree and they go out in the workplace, they're not going to be working by themselves. They're going to be members of a team. You know, no matter where you go, you don't work 100% by yourself unless you start your own company and work from home.
But even then,
maybe.
You'll be working. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're still going to be working with people. You have to be able to communicate. So, I mean, this is the thing. So having them be able to work in groups is a great way to teach them these skills. You know, you can appoint roles inside the group. So there's one who's the leader. There's one who does this. There's one who does something else, and then they can rotate those roles amongst themselves for different projects. So, I mean, I think this is a great way to help our students learn how to communicate.
Absolutely. And I was speaking to some teachers recently, and I put a little question in the chat box at the beginning of the session, and I said, what do you do? What's your job? It's a trick question. And the English teacher. I said, no, you're not. You're a teacher. English just happens to be something that concerns you. Above all, you're a teacher. And I love the fact that you're saying that these skills of collaboration, working together, problem solving, discussing, respecting other people's opinions, learning how to interact. Yes, it's a way of learning English. It's a way of
Mm.
applying the English, but it's also a life skill, and will apply
Absolutely.
if they're working in Arabic in a company or whatever in 10 years time or something. And I think that's, if anyone said to me, what's the future of English language teaching, I would say it is that. It is, yes, we're teaching English, but we're teaching a lot of other things around it as well. And I think
Exactly.
these
Exactly.
communication skills, I mean, 21st century skills is perhaps a misnomer in that is now the 21st century. But is that beginning to happen, do you think, in the university sector across the Middle
Of
East, where
course.
people, that they
No,
are engaging with that?
100%.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, of course, 100%. And um uh, it's not, you have the 21st century skills, soft skills, all of
Yeah.
these things are important, because when the students graduate, you want to make certain they have these skills so that they can be successful in the workplace.
Mm.
Extremely important. um at least from my experience, it's definitely something that is happening here in the Gulf.
Yeah, and I think it's also the internet has given us a gift there as well, because I think young people, look at my own sons when they're going off to university, one's that finished, one's about to go. But when they were sort of 13, 14, 15, they were working, they would do their homework online sometimes together, or probably one of them would do the homework and the other would copy. It doesn't matter. They were working in some sort of team. They were collaborating. I think the internet's given us a gift there. They're kind of used to it. They're used to working in virtual small groups, and of course, COVID has reinforced that even more. So I think it's absolutely important that teachers feel happy to, as it were, take some sort of step back. Just a final thing to explore. I'm looking at the list of 147 people who are with us. I've no idea whether people have been in the Middle East for years, or whether, as I say, they just arrived from the airport or somewhere in between. What kind of cultural tips or advice would you give to a teacher, particularly going to the Gulf or one of the other Arab countries, for someone coming first time in the Arab world, teaching in a high school or a university environment, things that people should be aware of, and maybe in their course books, but also in the way that they work with the students?
Okay, I think the first thing is something that you brought up as well. If you were living in a society that's different from your own, take up the chance to learn the language that's being spoken there. So obviously, if you're living in the Gulf, Arabic is something that you would want to try to understand at least, because then it helps you as an educator to recognize the linguistic and cultural differences between Arabic and English. And it helps you to relate to your students more. And this is important, especially when you're at the lower levels of English teaching. The students who are down there at the true beginner, intermediate level, you want to make certain that they understand that you understand what they are going through. And it's just a good idea to get some background on Arabic learners in general before you start on this teaching adventure in a new country, a new culture, if you've never been here before. And when you think about when you're dealing with learners of English, it's important to make yourself as familiar as possible with their first language. And it just helps you to anticipate particular problems, whether it's with knowing how to use the article correctly, or pronunciation problems. The example I gave previously, the pa and the ba, that's just one example, and the vowel sounds. And it just makes you more cognizant of these factors. So when you're preparing your lessons, you can take this all into account.
I absolutely agree. Sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
No, I mean, and of course, there's also the empathy that you gather from going through the process, which they pick up. Also, I also, years ago, there was a big chain of private language schools based in the UK, and one of their requirements for getting a teaching job was that you had studied a foreign language, any foreign language, up to the age of 18. You've done it as one of your A levels, one of your school leaving certificates. It no longer applies. But I really like this idea that surely, how can you be a language teacher without having learned a language? I mean,
Exactly.
ideally, it would be the language of the country you're going to, but when you do your training or university, you don't know. But, you know, I did French at school and had actually an appalling French teacher, I now realise, but never mind. At least you have some awareness. When going to Italy was my first job, and I bought, you know, BBC Teach Yourself Italian or something. I had a few classes, and it really does make a difference. But I just think I find it hard to imagine an English teacher who hasn't learnt another language. I don't really care which language it is, because you just know how hard it is. And I think some of us who aren't learning a language or we forget.
Yes.
You know, it's just ghastly, really. We don't remember how hard it is for people. We've got 2 or 3 minutes left, so I'll just see quick look at the chat department, which has been very active.
While you're doing that, I just want to throw something out there. I mean, if you are, even if you're not familiar, I mean, if you're not familiar, you come here for the first time and you're not familiar with the local culture, whether it's Saudi or Kuwait or Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, Oman, whatever the case may be, use this to your advantage, because then what you can do, it gives you an opportunity to find out things from your students. So you can ask them questions about their culture. And then it provides more opportunities for authentic communication. And this is what we want in the classroom. We want to help our students to produce authentic language. So if you want to learn more about their culture and you really don't know much about it, then start quizzing your students on it. And then they'll be more than happy to share with you based on my own experience when I came over 20 years ago.
I absolutely agree, and that goes back to what I was saying about behavioral psychology. This idea of the affective relationship with language, where people are talking about something that's important to them, and people's own country, their own culture, their own traditions are important to them, of course, for obvious reasons. So, saying to Saudi guys, you know, tell me a little bit about traditional food that you might eat, or talking about what you do at weekends, and people start to share. And I think that really does make a difference, as you say, because they're talking about something that they care about. And I think that's a really good tip. And you get a kind of primer in Saudi culture or Qatari culture very quickly, which I think is important to everybody. Well, we're about to run out of time. I think we've only got a minute left. As ever, there's not enough time. There never is enough time, but that's the nature of human existence, isn't it, really?
Yes.
Someone says non-native speaking English teachers have an advantage over native English language teachers. Well, that's a big question. Another hot potato is, of course, the non-native speaker debate.
Time for another session. That's
huge a whole other session. Battle lines are certainly being drawn, but the world is changing, and I think the translanguaging thing fits in very, very closely with the native speaker debate. But
agree.
That's another discussion, because Cherish is about to disconnect us from the internet probably. So thank you to everyone that's joined us. I hope you found it useful. The problem with people like Dr. Ali and I, we probably don't agree on everything, but that's probably good. So we have lots we want to say, and I'm sure that she'll also enjoy sharing ideas as much as I did with people. So thank you for coming along. I hope it was useful. And Cherish, I'll hand back to you. Absolutely on time, it seems.
Exactly on time. But I think this was a great webinar. We had a very interactive chat box going and some wonderful comments came in. Thank you so much for sharing. And Dr. Alia and Christopher, I think this was one of the best sessions I've been to. You know, as you said earlier in the we were reading, Christopher, how it's good to hear from people than just looking at the slides. So I really enjoyed the session. Thank you so much, both of you, for your time today.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Well, thank you very much indeed. And all the best to you all for your new semesters that I know have started or are starting. I hope you get the best students in the world.
You're right. All the best for your back to university, and see you next time. Until then, thank you so much. And you'll get a recording of this session as well, and also the certificate in your email. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.